that's part of something that I think helps create that energy, or helps create an overall tone for the piece that can alleviate maybe, the heaviness of just looking at a singular image.
All right, so today for Ipso Gallery's Ipso Week, which we're calling Strange Angles, which is such a great name for this. We have Peter Reichardt with us today, who will be talking about his work. And it's important to say that Peter Reichardt is one of the mainstays of Ipso Gallery. He is our man that we go to all the time for weird ideas. We say, Peter, do you want to do this? And he says, yes. Like, seriously, every single time. And so it's been so great to feature his work, whether it applies to a very specific show that we've come up with, or whether it applies to his own body of work, which we've had the pleasure of featuring in our gallery as well. And so, Peter, welcome to our group discussion, and we'll be talking about some of our favorite Peter Reichardt works this week.
Thank you. Well, first I got to say it's been an absolute dream working with Ipso, and getting to be a part of the Sioux Falls artistic community. Everyone at Fresh Produce has been so welcoming to me. It's been wonderful. And that's why I say yes, because I love you guys and you've been really wonderful, and you're an important component to the culture of Sioux Falls.
I speak for everyone when I say we love you too.
Yes.
Okay, Angela, why don't we pull up an image to get the viewers up to speed? These are works that were water damaged, and we all have, any art student has works of art that have been kept in in the wrong type of container, receptacle, and works end up like this on occasion. We're curious about how this first caught your eye, and in terms of like our big discussion today, how did this trigger a series of ideas that basically came to fruition as a body of work?
So yes, I stored these improperly, and it was one of those things where Brookings does a spring cleanup every year, so I was going through the basement as Christy had asked me to, and I had known that I needed to, and so I was going through and uncovering all these little like treasure trove moments of things that I had done either in undergraduate in my undergraduate education or my graduate education, works on paper primarily that had been damaged basically by water. My basement tends to flood quite a lot, more often than I would like it to. But as I was going through all these like emotions and thoughts and feelings and remembrances were coming back as I was looking at them. And, when I made them, of course, I tried to maintain some high level of craftsmanship with how I handle paper. And I didn't even really think about the longevity of paper and what may transpire over time, how, elements may affect. And so as I was going through these, I was thinking, oh no, they're damaged. Like, how could I have been so stupid? But then I started to realize and identify that there's beauty in what had transpired with my negligence. So right now, like that little element of chance that happened with it, I see as an opportunity to kind of maybe try to purposely manipulate how the surface of the materials or the surface and appearance of the work that I make may grow over time. And of course, I mean, I know that, with longevity of maintaining works, physical appearance is important. So I'm looking at and experimenting ways with how I can manipulate that to making the appearance of it being, damaged, but without it actually being damaged now. And that's something that I have in my checkbook of things I need to do over the summer. So and really, I think chance is a big element in my work, or at least like how I evolve in imagery in my work. And something like that is completely like out of my hands that I didn't anticipate. I don't see those any longer as being damaged works, but as being sort of the genesis of something else I can explore and the next phase of my work.
Who would have thought that mold could be revelatory, that it would lead you in a direction like that. I love that you could embrace something that even you thought was a tragedy and start to see mold or this infiltration of, basically a living organism as like a mark, as a surface quality, as something that contributes to the feel and the demise of the work at the same time, that it could evoke something emotional and yet be provocative in just its visual attributes. All of those things are pretty fascinating about this new direction you're going in.
Yeah. Well, and I spend a lot of time kind of like thinking about and remembering sort of my growth as an artist and my art education and people that I looked at, people that were influencers to me. And yeah, I've always loved Sigmar Polk, and like seeing these works make me think about his work in a different way, or at least appreciate it in a more profound way. Dieter Roth, another German artist, was someone that I probably would have never really paid too much attention to, but I've really enjoyed looking at his work in the light of this new discovery. Same thing with Paul Thek. I never knew of him as an growing up, or in undergrad or graduate school even, but his work, like now I see that idea of appreciating like decay in a new light. So it's nice to now finally, see and appreciate artists that I didn't know about or didn't pay any attention to in a new way, and see actually how much they might influence me moving forward.
Yeah.
And how they influence me looking at the present.
Right. Yeah. Okay. I feel like I got to ask the first question.
Yeah.
Tom or Angela, does one of you want to ask about some of your favorite works, favorite Reichardt processes?
Tom, you can jump in and I'll pull the photo for you, and then I'll go after you.
Let's do that.
Okay. You want to do mountains?
Let's do the mountains.
Okay.
I think it's the middle mountain that's in Fresh Produce. Is that right, Liz?
Yes.
And then when I came in for an interview for my internship at Fresh Produce, I noticed that giant mountain. And I asked Ted, I was like, is that a Peter Reichardt drawing? I didn't see your website before this, but I could tell this style is yours. And so can you explain, and after I looked at the picture on your website, you used two different sun angles. Is that right for these mountains?
Yeah, so basically what I did was I had a source image, and that's part of my practice is I do a lot of manipulation to like found imagery or appropriated imagery. And I like to refer to it as found imagery because I'm not necessarily appropriating something that would be at the forefront of like a public vernacular, visual vernacular, like the Coca-Cola logo or, McDonald's, logo. It is appropriated, but I feel like finding it is part of a big part of my research and finding something that I feel like I can work with that speaks to me. And so with that image in particular, what I did was I just scanned it, took it into Photoshop, and then just hand drew with my mouse trackpad just a number of variations of the center that was cut out that I would then flip to expose and create two different sort of light sources, even though it's the same image or from the same singular light source. And then from there, my process, and I always describe it as a sort of a mental grid, you know, so I think those that have been through a drawing one class like yourself are familiar with the idea of gridding out an image to make the information a little bit more manageable in a building process. And so I don't necessarily work with a grid or a physical grid. I mentally just kind of keep track of the components. I mean, I break it down in my mind to like, okay, this is square one, this is square two. And that helps me, you know, get some sense of placement and proportion. It helps me helps me identify where things should be. But really in the process of the mountains, because that imagery is so varied, you know, in regards to the information, I work with kind of a mark making process where I approximate, you know, kind of the placement of where some of that stuff would be. And through trial and error, and a lot of my work comes through working, you know, trying stuff out first before I commit to a larger piece. I developed a process of a glazing process where I worked with basically 3 or 4 colors. And I kind of start with a sepia tone and I do the darker values or anything that would be like a mid-tone or kind of light range. And then I map out where that shadow would be, which is what is a blue slate pencil or color pencil color. And then I just basically kind of work with this heavy process of glazing over everything that I had previously done. So everything starts out as kind of a monochromatic image, and then that blue all of a sudden transforms it into this kind of really interesting, slightly photographic image. And one of the reasons why I do photo manipulation is because I want to try and make it or give something of myself to the image, you know, rather than just recreating a photograph like what the, you know, I guess the grandfathers and grandmothers of photorealism have done, but really trying to just change it and give myself, or give something of myself to it.
My question is linked to that, and I'll quickly share this slide. We have the piece, the ones with the plants, but something that I remember from your artist talk a while ago at the South Dakota Art Museum was something you said about ownership or making it your own. And even with these found images or collage works, your process involves redrawing them. What draws you to that idea of this thing already exists, how do I make it my own?
That's a great question. And honestly, I think it's something that I continue to ask myself whenever I am working in the studio and how I, you know, choose which works to pursue. I mean, I do a lot of collage work, either physically or digitally, to identify interesting relationships between where an image stops being its source and starts to become something that I can say, this works. And, you know, and I explain it like, oh, and I forget the judge, but like when they were talking about how pornography is identified, they said, well, I know it when I see it. And again, I'm not sure exactly, I have it in notes of where that source who said that, but that's kind of the way I think about it, is like, I know when those moments, those relationships and points actually start to begin working. And that's where I really start to get excited, is because it starts to create a new energy in the work. And I guess one of the things that I've always thought about in regards to using that word energy, and I guess you could also say presence, is with like someone like Ellsworth Kelly. His work, is fairly minimalist. And as a student, particularly when I was, 19, 20 years old, I really didn't like it, even though I had been exposed to it. And I guess I was still naive in understanding its importance and how it operates as a source of energy to a room or to an experience. And that's kind of where I'm going with when I am in that search of playing around with stuff. So that piece in particular, I think I entitled it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And that just refers back to the fact of the 6 different layers of collaged elements that I included in redrawing it. And then to get back to the other point of that, and the idea of like redrawing something, why not just scan it in, print it out? Like personally, I am really engaged in that meditative process of drawing something. And I feel like that embeds, again, ownership, but also embeds a quality or a human element to a visual work that I personally like to see. It's not that I don't love like Thomas Ruff or Thomas Demand or other photographers. I just feel like personally for me, that's an important element and quality to work that I put out in the world.
I really enjoy everything you just said. I'm thinking deeply about all of it and trying not to go off on a tangent on one thought, but continue to move along with you. One of the things we've enjoyed about the mountainscape at Fresh Produce that Tom was referencing, and your desk like faces it, doesn't it, Tom?
Yes, it does.
Yeah, you look at it all day long.
I'm sorry, Tom.
No, it's awesome.
People will look at it and be like, wow, it's a great big mountain, drawn by hand, and they're blown away at its scale, the execution. But I also have to explain to my students as I take them through the space, that's not just a mountain. It's easy to almost digest that as just this thing. It's mind-blowing when you begin to realize it is a manipulated mountain, that those are supernatural shadows, that there's that we get lost in the rubble and snow and the texture of looking at a mountain and lose the logic that this isn't configured exactly correctly. Mm-hmm. And then it becomes really engaging. And I see my students just kind of, their brains melt and they just they love it all the more. But that's part of what's enjoyable about these pieces is that we can't simply digest them as representations of a thing. We are invited into your process once we understand that it has been manipulated. And then it becomes that window into you. And I love the word energy that you use, the energy that it brings to all of us in our space, and that daily energy that comes from the mountain inside Fresh Produce.
Well, I'm incredibly proud that it is a part of the Ipso and Fresh Produce collection. It's an honor, really, for it to be there. And not in my basement getting water damaged.
Then we're all lucky.
Yeah. No, and honestly too, that is part of the thing that I think about, particularly because I try and make it, appear photographic from a distance, but then the tactile texture and, the individual, say, impressions that might happen in the paper surface when you get up close creates this kind of connection to like, oh, this was, something that was rendered over a long period of time. And then the fact that a lot of times people will I try and create this situation where people will just assume that it is one thing, but then as soon as they start to think about it a little bit differently, or maybe examine the light source, they can see, wait a minute, something's happening here. And
Yeah.
That's always one of those areas that I navigate, is that sort of cut edged line. And, you know, in the cave drawings, in the mountain drawings, is where that break is from one reality to another reality. And that's part of that relationship that I try to look for when I'm searching. And that's where all of a sudden those moments might happen that I can, you know, identify. That's like, oh, wait a minute, this is working. It's not just this glaringly obvious break. It's something that might gel.
You're referencing something that Angela and I talked about before this interview started, which is a sense of, and the beauty of awkwardness. When something does not fulfill the idea you wanted it to, or expected it to, or have been trained to think it needs to be, or needs to appear to be. Instead, it has a awkwardness that allows you to begin to view it differently, either by artist process or as the object itself, the subject matter itself as being rendered, rethinking what that is. But the beauty is sometimes in that awkwardness, like where that is created and how you have tripped up our process of understanding something very beautifully.
Oh, I appreciate that. And I will say, I think a lot of times we think of ourselves as being awkward as, you know, middle schoolers, teenagers, so forth and so on, but I still think of myself as pretty awkward. And I think I kind of enjoy that a little bit. You know, like here in Brookings, I mean, I can't tell you how many times people have looked at Christy and I when we go through Hy-Vee or something like that. But, you know, like, awkwardness is a really endearing quality. And if there was one artist that I could aspire to be, that I would absolutely love to be able to make work like, is Joachim Nordstrom and his wife, Mama Anderson. Joachim Nordstrom's work is just absolutely gorgeous to me, but it would be, and I've shown it to students before, something that they would consider to be really naive and really immature, or, you know, just uneducated, I guess. But I find a lot of beauty in that work, not only for the technical processes that he's working with and creating his work with and her work with, but just the overall appearance of the work, that just the joy that it brings to me, you know. And that's what I mean. Again, there certainly I don't work in that mode, but that's the type of thing that I'm looking for to make, right?
Angela, thanks for taking notes. I saw Angela writing it down. I'm gonna have to get all this later from you.
You would recognize this work if you saw it.
Yeah, I recognize the name, but it's not coming to mind right away.
Sure. And that's the thing. I'm not always good with artist names, but like I know their work, and I feel a big part of my education was done outside of the classroom, in the library, and, you know, online, or going to galleries and museums and stuff like that. There were some really wonderful summers that I had where I worked, you know, a barista job from like 1 to midnight, and between like 9 and 12 o'clock, I would go to the school library and just like pick up a book, flip through it, and, you know, write down some artist names from like a drawing show from the 1963 or something like that. And I, you know, do some research, and then that really helped inform me on my likes and dislikes in work. And, you know, even the work that I didn't like, I now, again, like I had mentioned, I find that it has still informed me in some way that's been really wonderful. So I tell students in classes, and Tom, I don't know if you did the taste project or not.
I didn't.
Oh, okay. But yeah, I do have students do a presentation, and I pulled this from that paper monument book, Draw It With Your Eyes Closed, but students are asked to find a work of art that they like, a work of art that they don't like, a work of art that they like but might not think is successful, and then a work of art that they don't like but have to admit is successful. And so it's kind of interesting how that kind of frames the way that they may and how it may inform their own work that they make in the class, you know, things that they want to avoid, things that they like, so forth and so on. But at least it gets them looking at work, right? And that's the best thing.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. I love that you used the word endearing when you talk about awkwardness, because that was one thing that Liz and I talked about, how the awkwardness or like those moments in your work hold you a little longer to actually explore, oh yeah, there is a cutout, or this element of it doesn't quite fit if it was a photorealistic mountain. And that's so charming in a way, and obviously even creates space to have a conversation like this, you know, and Liz having the opportunity to talk to her students and saying, actually look a little closer, or look at the mark making, and look at the angles that things are coming from. And I think that's what appeals to so many of us at Ipso and Fresh Produce, and why we're so drawn to your work, is having that space to be like, wait, let's break it down, you know?
Yeah.
And that's very charming.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I like the word charming too. I mean, I would say one of the things that I've tried to maintain in my work is like a sense of humor, or at least a sense of it not being this heavy, like monolithic statement, you know, so that it has room to breathe, or room for people to see it perhaps in different ways, and have that kind of moment where they recognize something that they didn't see at first. Again, that certainly that's not for every work, but you know, with the cave drawings, one of the things that I encountered when I was first trying to frame them was that I had ordered the mat size just a little bit too large, or either that or American Frame cut it just a little bit too large. And so I was thinking, how do I don't want to continue to draw out this element so that it ends, you know, that I you know, it fills that mat. But I decided, wait a minute, I love this like pink fluorescent tape. I'm just gonna like put it over the edges, and I'm gonna include it because again, it kind of connects to the fact that it connects to an element in the studio that I really appreciate, of this idea of work kind of being in process. And so it just happened to be this little like moment of like response that I made that all of a sudden changed my interpretation of these things. It kind of made it humorous because it wasn't so heavy and dark. And obviously, you know, some of the titles I've tried to make for these pieces hopefully kind of like also do that, you know, like never follow a hippie to a second location. You know, things like that, that wouldn't necessarily be like, okay, that's what I think of when I see this work, but, you know, it makes me think about it in a different way, and hopefully it makes the viewer kind of interpret it in a little bit of a different way, because they are pretty heavy, just as, you know, monochromatic black and white, you know, drawings. They're really matte. They're, you know, there's some weight there, and hopefully that, you know, fluorescent tape lifts that weight a little bit, or the title may lift that weight.
You talk about like bringing your, sorry Liz.
That's okay, go ahead.
You talk about bringing your studio into your drawings, and that's one thing that, you know, does come up in a few of your series, is revealing the process. Either it's color pencil or like a palette, or some notes that you've written maybe during the process that don't totally relate to the work. Does that come from you being a teacher, or does that come from you wanting to show process and be open about that?
I kind of think it stems from me wanting to show process, but being a teacher is certainly a part of it. And, you know, one of the things, again, growing up, I was thinking, okay, works have to be this complete finished thing that you don't see any of that type of stuff. But when I, you know, encounter works on paper, either in galleries or museums or in drawing files, like I really do love that quality of seeing some of that thought process. And that's why some of those color swatches happen with color pencil drawings, or maybe something is sort of left out. Again, that's part of something that I think helps create that energy, or helps create an overall tone for the piece that can alleviate maybe, you know, the heaviness of just looking at a singular image, but actually knowing that, you know, or having some insight into a thought process, or, you know, mode of representation. Or so it's like this piece here in particular was just a kind of a combined collage of a number of different pieces that were kind of made in the studio, not as or not specifically as kind of like being a finished piece. It was more kind of like the debris that happened in the process of making something that would be finished. And again, I find a lot of beauty in it. And certainly there is some manipulation in this particular piece. Like there were some pieces that I were like, okay, there needs to be something here, so I'll put something in to make it look like I did it, you know, just in the heat of the moment. But, you know, it all ends up being something that I find really intriguing. And again, it makes me reevaluate this idea of like having a completed piece. I like the idea of something being still open to growth or to evolution in the process.
That is exactly what I wanted to ask you about too. And Tom, go ahead. I was just saying that what Angela just asked about process is a huge part of what I think about with your work, but I like the pieces that just give us those swatches of process too, that are really just clues about the history of the work and clues about your thinking and the momentum of the studio. Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, I was just going to say, having humor in your work and showing the process and the side sketches around the piece of the paper, it invites the people that are looking at it to appreciate it by not having to be like an artist to appreciate it. So it's like, it could be a regular person be like, oh, he did this way. I understand it, and it's really great. So it's like a bridge to your audience.
I also like having, you know, writing things down in the margins. I mean, I guess all of us do that in some form or fashion, whether we're on, you know, in meetings or in class or something like that, writing stuff down. I like how that invites the viewer into someone's frame of mind at a certain point in time. But I also like to the disassociation between combining that with other things. So like with, you know, particular pieces, you know, it might be one image and then we'll say something completely different. And that's something that, again, invites this, or is this invitation into interpretation for the viewer. And again, not everyone has to spend you know, a ton of time with work, but I do like to be able to have this moment of disassociation that maybe allows the viewer to think about something in a little bit of a different way. And if they just like are like, why is that there? You know, that's fine too. But and with the color swatches too, like I remember colors by, and particularly I work with Prismacolor pencils, and with that's Tom, I always like try to push that off onto students, but like I remember colors based off of the name, but I don't always remember what the actual color looks like. And so a lot of those swatches are me testing out like, okay, maybe this color should be good, maybe this one should be good. And then like with moving in stereo over there, that was a basically a piece of paper that I was using as a palette. And, for some reason it, got collected. And then I was like, oh God, this is really kind of nice. I like the qualities here. And then I had been listening to a lot of, and I'm blanking on his name right now. 80s synth artist, Gary Newman. And he did that song Moving in Stereo. And so I was like, all right, yeah, right. Like some of this is like spur of the moment, like kind of things where I use it maybe as a way to remember something that was happening in my life or in my studio at that point in time.
That's interesting because it's a type of record keeping for you in some way. I don't think even works of art themselves they're a record in the way that you said you took a trip through time with all those, moldy pieces of work and going through them and thinking about these important moments in your life. But the records that I tend to reference frequently are like old scraps of paper palette and old sketches, more often for thinking and for moving forward than finished works of art themselves. So I see the record keeping in those more process oriented works that you've done, that kind of acknowledgement of process and what's valuable in moving forward.
Yeah, personally, I can look at old work and for the most part, can kind of remember what was going on in my life at that point in time, or, what I was going through, or, where I was. And I appreciate that about being able to go back through work. And again, that idea of like kind of keeping it something open to an evolution. Mm-hmm. I see lots of possibilities with that older stuff as I can, connect to it now, or reappropriate it to something that is in the present. But record
using chance now too with mold, and which inspires me to like think of what am I not doing that involves chance. And next time I trip over my dog's leash and I skin my elbow, I'll just start making little black prints. Or whatever. Peter, we've come to the end of our 30-minute interview, but we just want to thank you for being an inspiration to all of us South Dakota artists, particularly all of Fresh Produce, with your energy and your insight and your creativity.
Well, it's a great honor to be a part of that. And I thank all of you for, having me here today, and for all of the support that you've shown me over the years, all the laughs and fun that we've had, and the opportunity to, show my work. I really appreciate that. You guys are my greatest champions. Besides my mom, I guess. I don't know.